Grow Great is a city government leadership podcast with Lisa Norris and me, Randy Cantrell. Each week we share insights, experiences, and wisdom to help you and your leadership grow great. Our website is growgreat.com.
So I'm in a new role, been in HR, 27 years of my career here in Grand Prairie, and got up in this new role, thought transition would be fairly easy. And as I got into it, having been a director over a team where you can have direct influence, and then coming up here, having multiple directors that are capable with their teams, leading their teams. I remember we have weekly meetings with our city manager's office team, which is me, the two deputy city managers, my peer, another managing director, and our city manager. And in there, I remember those first few weeks, we're going over things, and the city manager is telling us, he's new too. He came in role in August of last year, so almost a year now. And as the weeks went on, he would kind of go around the room with our updates. And as I gave updates, I would question something. And I remember in there at some point, he would say, guys, we gotta listen. And I was like, in my head, I'm thinking, we are listening, right? But it was this listen. And if you're like me, I had to sit back after the meetings and going, am I not listening? Because I feel like I'm listening. And that's what my whole role, my whole career had been. Yes, yeah. It felt corrective versus kind of intentional. But like many, I would talk with Randy and I'm like, man, I feel like I'm listening, but it was repeated, not at me. It was at the group. We have got to listen more. And so what I intentionally did, as did my peer, for the next few weekly meetings, we kind of just sat back. We didn't comment much. We listened to the conversation between the two deputies and the city manager. Of course, if they asked a question and we had knowledge directly to us, we would speak up. But other than that, we really sat and observed more. And for me, internally, it was intentional to go, okay, what am I potentially doing that feels like to the others I'm not listening, right? You have to internalize and really assess. I think as leaders, we have to do that anyway. But, as Randy and I were preparing this morning, he had sent a quote, which I have to put on record. He thought I sent him. I said, I've never seen this before.
I still think you sent it to me, but I don't know.
And we'll post it in the after the show. But it's an owl sitting on a branch with 3 baby owls. One's clearly not paying attention, and it's his head turned. But it says that if I can speak, the wise old owl. A wise old owl sat in an oak. The more he saw, the less he spoke. The less he spoke, the more he heard. Why can't we be like that wise old bird? And to a point, it tells you sometimes we do have to take a step back and watch what's going on around us. We don't always have to have a story to tell. I'm certainly guilty of that. If somebody's talking and they have something, I think as humans, we naturally want to share. We want to share oh yeah, I understand that. Here's what happened to me. I'm guilty of that myself. But I have found, especially in this role, anybody in HR or other roles where you have employees that come to you for any reason, your own, others, seeking counsel and guidance, that's corrective, whatever it needs to be, sometimes we really just need to watch more and speak less. I've said it over and over. I've had a boss tell me, I should say a mentor really, that says, you have 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. Use them proportionally, listen more, speak less. And I think that's a good point.
Yeah, there's a balance for sure. I mean, I'm thinking of 2 friends that I've got. One is just a barrage of questions. Mm-hmm. It's one question after another question. By the time you get to about the 3rd question, it feels like an interrogation. It doesn't feel like curiosity anymore. Now, I've known this person for a long, long time. The other friend I've also known for a long, 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 long time. And there's no questions ever. There's just one story followed by another story, because his own stories spark ideas in his head for other stories. And so it's just constant story time. And I catch myself with both individuals at some point. I just have to escape.
Yeah.
I just have to, at some point, I'm tired of speaking. I'm tired of being the one answering the questions. And with the other one, I'm just exhausted from hearing all the stories. So all that to say this, I think there's this balance, and the circumstances clearly dictate it. Context matters. Your context, you're coming into CMO for the first time in a long storied career, and it's appropriate to not be the one speaking, to be the one listening, because you're in this learning curve. They also are in a learning curve. So it could be argued, okay, well, if everybody's in the learning curve, well, I mean, we've got to talk. We have to communicate with one another. And I think in your situation, to be fair, I mean, now in retrospect, do you feel like it was more of a general admonishment as opposed to you, Lisa, or you people, or do you think it was more of a we kind of a thing? We as CMO, we need to make sure we're listening. I mean, now in retrospect, how do you read it?
I think it was, I honestly think it was, I feel it was directed really towards Walter and I and our growth. And that's my suspicion. And
because y'all were the new additions.
The time as admonishment. That's how I took it, because everything was so new and I was just trying to figure it out and trying to do the right thing and trying to get my feet underneath me in this role. The wisdom that came from that ultimately. Now, it's kind of hard to explain, because it was, am I not listening, or are they telling us to listen to absorb more things? And what I have learned in hindsight, whether it was intended or not, is to watch and listen at the same time is very powerful, because I was watching the dynamics. I was listening for, how is this working? What are they saying? What is important to them? And I also watched and took example from Megan and Cheryl, who are two deputy city managers. They were intently listening to Bill, speaking less, listening to the message. He's trying to share messages. Sure. What are important to him as values. So that's what I gathered more in hindsight, although it felt I was like not doing something well or right. That's how I took it personally. But at the time, now looking back, I gained so much more from just observing and watching as to the cadence of the meeting and how it evolved. And I remember, Randy, you saying, the team needed to just figure it out. You're all new. You're all new up there in the last 3 years, 4 years, maybe. And with Walter and I being very new in the last 6 months now, and 9 months, and then Bill being at the time very new, we were all just trying to figure it out as a team. So that watching
this group
is
together,
important.
This group together, in spite of whatever skins anybody had on the wall, was a brand new team. This was a brand new team.
That's correct.
Bill, a relatively new city. Well, so Bill's a city manager, and now he's got 2 deputies. That's the first time this team of 3 had ever existed. Now insert you and Walter as managing directors, and now the dynamic changes.
Trying to figure it out.
Yeah, the dynamic changes slightly. At some point, and don't share if you don't want to, but at some point, did you make inquiry about this? Listen, I mean, did you ask, I mean, is there something I'm doing that I can improve, that I can do better when it comes to this listening thing? Because I'm continuing to hear, listen more, listen more, listen more, and I feel like I'm kind of being quiet and listening. What are y'all seeing? What are y'all seeing maybe that I'm not seeing? Were any of those conversations had?
I know I inquired more because the team was newer. So I didn't feel quite yet like I could go to a Bill or a Megan because I had my chain of command. So I'm trying to be respectful of that. So Cheryl and I did talk about it
Right.
a little bit. And I said, listening.
And that was a pre-existing
and she,
chain of command for our audience because
correct.
Lisa reported to the same person that she had reported to for a period of time. So that was a
That's
good thing.
correct. Yes. And so I could, and I, we had trust in our relationship. So at the time I went to, I was like, man, he keeps focusing on listen. And she said, yeah, we all do. But I noticed her and Megan did the same thing. And I think it's a matter of respect. He's trying to coach and tell us his values. He's sharing stories. So we're all listening with intent of he's trying to share meaning about something important to him. And that's how I took it. I can't speak to how they took it, but he very much had stories. In fact, I always appreciate that because he'll say, I'm preaching again. I'm preaching again. And we're like, no, that's insight is great. We need to understand your insight because if we know what's important to him, it gives a layer of perspective. So,
and he's also trying to establish his culture. He's now the number one, and he's different. He's going to be different than the previous number ones, no matter what.
Right.
No judgment on them, but they weren't Bill. So
yes.
He's going to have to roll his own.
My conversations kind of with Cheryl were listening, and she said, yeah, we just need to remain quiet. Just let him say what's important to him, which I appreciated. We were all doing that anyway, but I said, I feel like a listen. And she said, yeah, we just need to listen as a team. We need to quiet our mouths, don't speak, and just listen to what he's saying.
But don't you think it transcended y'all's relationship? Don't you think my sense of it at the time, not to speak out of turn, but it was the five of you, but then it was the five of you, and then all of this extension outward. My sense of it in real time was not just listen here, but more importantly, let's listen out here.
Yeah. Well, and to that point, I would agree. And to that point, what did ultimately happen? So remember, I said at the time, I didn't feel like in that meeting or I could go to him. But there was a point later and it's not for lack of trust. It's just he's in a new role. I'm in a new role. It just wasn't the right time to ask those questions specifically. Right. I really did, like the wise old owl. Okay, he's saying, listen, listen, listen. I'm going to take that for what I'm hearing it and be quieter.
Yeah.
Right. Not that we were all over talking each other. We aren't that kind of group. But what did happen later is he had popped by months later, and Randy, and for the audience, we've talked about telling a story before. You want to tell a story. You need to think about the story. If we don't tell it, someone else will create their own, and it will not be good. That's been your point. And so one time he had popped by and just popped in my office. And then we were just talking, just general. We talk about it. We're both hunters. We were just talking generally. And I remember in there, I told him, I said, I kept that in mind, Randy, what you had said. And I said, you've mentioned listen before. I want you to know I am listening, and here's what I'm hearing. And this is what's important to me. And I want you to, and we just kind of went back and forth, nothing in depth. I just wanted to make a point that I heard him and I was listening, and I'm applying that. He may not see it because we don't work together daily like Cheryl and I do.
Right.
And he's like, I know you are. And it was just casual conversation, nothing, super intuitive or anything like that. But again, to the point, I wanted that story to be heard, that I really, truly am listening and hearing what you're saying. And it's important to me, and I'm applying it to my leadership of my team, those that I can influence. And it comes down to our entire focus on this podcast and our culture and our point as a whole, which is a focus on others. He gave insight. I had to listen to that insight, apply it, and choose how I could apply that to others. And it's not about me. I felt it was about me at the time, right? I felt like, man, I'm struggling and this is directed at me. But ultimately, it made me better when I looked inward and said, okay, it's being stressed. What can I apply and do differently to that point? Whether I see it or not, it's being stated and um, emphasized so much. We're doing something that they're telling us, listen, listen, listen. And so inwardly, I had to apply that and then focus on my team so that I could serve them. And remember, we can also serve up and out. So I just tried to apply it to what I can do better. And I think for me, Randy, it's very helpful because you've done this before. Cheryl has done this before. If you talk less and watch more, you can pick up so much more from your team and those in front of you by their body language, by their facial expressions when you say something. If you're not just focused on your own words, but what's in front of you from your people, because that's where the meat of leadership is, in my opinion. It's really watching your people and stopping for a second, going to hold on. And we called an audible in our last mentorship series. We stopped the lesson and addressed it. That's what's important here in understanding what we're talking about. Speak less and watch more, because that's way more powerful than your own words at times.
Yeah, and what Lisa's referring to, Grand Prairie implemented a mentorship program that, I'm honored to be a small part of, and facilitating the second group. And with any group, with any team of people, there can be at various times elephants in the room. And I'm a guy who gets enormously frustrated when we don't address the elephant in the room. Empathy just won't let me. Okay, we're just going to ignore that. We realize y'all are all preoccupied by whatever, but we're not going to talk about it. And so we called an audible, and that's what she's referring to. And we just kind of ditched the program because I sensed it and was aware of it. And it was a conversation that kind of needed to happen. A couple of things, one, Bill, he can often say, okay, I've gone to preaching, but I would say he was preaching, and I would say necessarily so. Those of us that go to church, so you go to church and you hear a sermon on Sunday, and then you go next Sunday and you hear maybe a similar, maybe a slightly different, but over and over, we largely are hearing similar messages. And those messages, I guess, could be summed up in, thankful for God and blessings and our duties, if any, to God. And for a leader, especially a new leader, the sermons get repeated, and they get repeated because we need them repeated. We forget.
You have to hear it more than once to apply it.
Yeah, we forget them, and we could sit there like we could in a church pew, and we could sit here and think, well, I hope she's listening to this sermon because it sure hits her. But you didn't do that. And high performers don't do that. High performers internalize it. High performers apply it to themselves. It's one reason that we're high performers. So if you don't do that, if you do hear your boss or a leader say something, if you do hear the sermon in church and you do think about the person sitting next to you instead of yourself, then I would challenge you and say, you've not yet reached the state of being a high performer. You've got to be willing to own it and take responsibility for yourself and not that person next to you. And Lisa did that. Now that can cause all kind of head trash.
It did.
Yeah,
it did in moments because I'm in a new role, a new space, but you moved through it.
But as you and I were talking through that, again, the context mattered of a new leader, a new leadership team put into place for the first time ever, and now trying to establish this new culture. And so, listen, all of that, I think, matters. I'm sitting here looking at this phrase, this poem, if you please. The more you see, the less you speak. For some people, that's not the case. We all know people I've been in countless business meetings, and somebody enters the room talking. And I've been in business meetings where somebody enters the room and it's the person who frankly shouldn't speak. They may not be the most seasoned person in the room. They may absolutely not be the wisest person in the room. Forget smartness, but wisdom. And they can enter the room and say, well, I think blah, blah, blah. Well, the rest of the room hasn't even had a chance to speak. And I think too many times as leaders, as bosses, we can do that. We can kind of poison the well and be the first to speak and tell our team, now, this is what I think. What do y'all think? Well, you're just going to get a bunch of yes people unless they feel safe to disagree with you.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a bad way to go. Better off as a leader to be the last one to speak and let the room breathe. I'm big on paying attention to body language and words and trying to pick up cues. I use it in my slide deck, and Lisa and I have talked about it on the show because it's just kind of a funny illustration of, and this happened within the last year. Rhonda and I have been married 46 years, and we're like most couples trying to figure out where you want to go to eat. And I just tell her, I'm craving fried okra. And she says, well, what about Panda? Panda Express is it's kind of a
yeah, those two are totally related.
Yeah, by the way, Panda Express does not have fried okra.
No, it does not.
So my slide deck, I just followed up and I put Q ignored. And I'm not throwing my wife under the bus. We all do this. But I think it's important. I think it's important for us to get some sense of the room. To your point, you said earlier about timing. Timing matters. It's just absolutely true. It's hard to get in trouble by being quiet.
Right.
Our mouths can get us into so much trouble. And our mouths, especially if we're the boss, our mouths can shut down great ideas and great innovation. Our mouth can shut down people's need to vent, people's need to express themselves, people's need to matter, their need to be understood. And we can hamper all of that just merely by being the one that dominates the conversation.
Yeah, I think if you have a need, I think all of us as leaders need to watch if we are always talking, always giving the advice, always telling people what to do and how to do it. We need to use caution. We need to be listening, like you mentioned, being curious, asking questions so we can seek understanding to what they're struggling with. If we don't have the knowledge and understanding, we can't possibly help them solve it. If we are just here to say, well, what you should do is, which sometimes that's necessary, but it shouldn't be the go-to response as they're trying to talk to you about something, because pretty soon they will get quiet because they're like, okay, they're not listening. I know what they think I should do. That doesn't work for me, right? You have to know the personality. You have to know their people. You have to know what they're struggling with and what their natural abilities are. Is that it's something that's difficult for them? Is it something easy for them? Is it outside their comfort zone that you're going to need to coach them through it? There's so many aspects of listening, active listening to what they are talking about and what they are doing that's critical here to truly focus on them and not yourself. It's not how much great advice you can give. If they can't apply that advice, it's not good advice at all, right? They have to be able to understand that you have their best interest at heart. How can I help you solve for this? Not the way I would solve for it, because my way may not be a great way for you, and it may not fit the circumstances. So that's what's really important as a leader. The most important part of this is the more you see. The more in that owl, the more you see, the less you speak, right? It's just really understanding and watching and asking and listening in order to serve them best.
Yeah, I think the selfishness, the pride, the self-focus, I just, through my experience and in my own life, those are at the root of it all. The root of it all is I've got something to say, And I realize we all want to matter, and we all want to feel like we're making a difference. And I think too frequently we feel like that difference must be made with me holding forth. And sometimes the difference that you can make is listening. I can tell you that I haven't learned very much by talking. And I do a lot of talking. I do a lot of podcasting. But I learn, it's interesting to me that this poem ends with a question. Why can't we be like that wise old bird? And for me, if there's one thing that I would pass on, is try your best to think in terms of questions. If when you do speak, you can come up with a great question, that's very different than, hey, I've got a story to tell. Hey, I got something to contribute. Because now it is about you in the sense that you're trying to understand, and it could be about you in the sense that you're trying to spark some good, positive debate. But it also could be that you're sparking in somebody else some great idea and some information that could be super helpful, not just to you, but to everybody else in the room. So my parting shot would be thinking questions so that when we do speak, and again, balance this. You don't want to be like my friend it's just one question after another question after another question after another question. And at some point you feel like you're in an interrogation room. Not that, but if we can ask questions so that we can better understand, that just helps the relationship grow. And it gives the other person a chance to shine and put themselves in the spotlight. And that's always going to be positive for you.
And I think that's the hardest thing to do sometimes. And in working in my relationship with you, Randy, through this several years now, as we've talked, and before we started this podcast, I learned so much, and I'll end with a story, but I learned so much because I did give advice, and I don't want the audience to feel like providing advice to your team members is not valid and important. It has to be, like you said, a nice blend of listening and asking questions. If they come into you and they're upset, can you help me understand why you're upset? What caused that? As they're talking, well, how did you take it when they say, it's just asking clarifying questions appropriately. And there are times I think you do need to provide advice and guidance. That is what our jobs are as leaders. So I don't want the audience to feel like Randy and I are saying, you just can only ask questions, don't give advice. That's not what we're saying. It is a nice, happy blend. But I'll end with a quick story that in my family that goes to this. I remember, so like many husband and wives, if you listen to what somebody's saying and you don't get your feelings hurt by it, which we may get our feelings hurt, but you really say, what were they saying that I need to hear? I remember Don and I were trying to, we just can't work on a lot of stuff together. We've gotten much better as we've aged to know how to, I call it your freaky buttons and what sets somebody off. But I remember Brandon, so I knew I couldn't work with him, but Brandon was helping him with something.
Your son?
My son, yes, my son Brandon. He's our youngest, and he's a police officer now, but very, very strong person, but quiet. He's a listener. He's very intuitive with people. And I remember he was working with Don on something, and they were out there, and Don's like, I need this, or I need that, or can you find this? And Brandon would grab stuff and give it to him. And he's like, I think we need to do this here. I don't even remember what they were working on. But I remember coming in, Brandon came in, and I said, how on earth do you and Dad just not get into it? And he goes, Mom, because I just give Dad what he needs. I don't ask any questions. You ask way too many questions, because I'm a knowledge seeker. Mm-hmm. So, and this is how and I say this because this is how it's improved. So I truly, he said it immediately. And what Brandon said, which was so wise for a 23-year-old at the time, he said, I can see 3 steps ahead. That's not going to work. But if Dad thinks it's a good idea to try it, why not allow him to try it? Because it might work and I might learn something. I don't think it's going to work, but I've not done it before. And I'm 23 and he's 50 something. And he said, I learned from him and he will figure it out if it wasn't the right step. But he goes, it works both ways. You ask to gain knowledge and it's irritating to him because he's already hot, tired, and trying to get this done, right? But that's a 23-year-old that I learned from. And I was like, you know what? I do. And Don had told me before, babe, stop asking questions. But I told him, now that transfer that forward in this story, we're at the land. I'm trying to use a tractor. I told him when we were going through this, he's getting frustrated because Don can pick stuff up. He's a natural at everything. If you show him once, he's got it. You show me once, and it needs to be 10 more times before I'm going to get it, right? And I remember him saying, babe, I told you have to do this. You have to pull this lever, move. And I finally said, I don't remember what I'm supposed to be doing. I need to practice it. I need to do it over and over. And so Don then listened. He goes, okay, this needs to be mowed over here. And we're going to have you go up and down and use all your levers. And he sent me over there. And I had to continually move those levers to do what I needed to. And guys, there's stuff in front of you. You have to pull up and down, buckets going up and down, the rear mower going up and down, how far, how tall, you're constantly having to watch all this stuff. But then Don got it. And when he's showing me something that I've never done, I told him, I just want to be able to help you. My end goal is to help you so you don't have to take care of this land by yourself. And once he clicked with that, now he's also letting me help him on a lot of stuff, but it takes him a lot more time and learning and teaching than it would take him.
He didn't tell you to just go to the house. That's how
no. He probably in his head wanted to. But that's what leadership is. And in a marriage, it's the same. His focus was then on me, not on how he would learn and how quick he can learn. So when you focus on others and you listen to what they're saying, no matter how painful that message is at the time, we can serve them so much better, like the wise old owl. Less talk, more listening, more watching, and you can really make an impact on others better.
Thanks for watching and listening to Grow Great, the City Government Leadership Podcast. For Lisa Norris, I'm Randy Cantrell. Be well, do good, grow great. The website is growgreat.com.